My name is Luca Gongor.
And I'm Freya from Small House.
And my name's Stevie Hertz, who's operating the camera.
Right, it's lovely to meet you, and I'm Freda Hammerton.
Could you please spell your name, please?
Hammerton.
The date is the 18th of November 2009.
When were you born?
Oh, 1930. Long time ago.
Sorry, whereabouts were you born?
I was born in Twickenham. I've lived in Twickenham all my life and moved here when I was 8.
Oh. And did you move for any particular reason? Or?
My granny had died. My grandfather had been killed in the First World War, aged 36. And my granny had lived here with 9 children. And then when she died, my father, who was the only waterman in the family, moved down here because he always wanted to be near the river. And of course, the next year the war broke out.
So, can you tell us about your first sort of childhood memories of the river?
I remember that it was always in the autumn. They have something called the draw-off, where, I don't know if you've heard about that, they lift the sluice gates and the half lock at Richmond, and so when the tide goes out, it goes out so that it's very empty of water, and this is when they can repair walls and the bottom of boats and things. And that happened. We moved in the September, and shortly afterwards this had happened down by the river. My mother had said I was not to go down on the riverbed, and I would go down and look, and there were boys down there getting lovely things out of the mud. I wasn't allowed to go. And of course the river was very busy then, because people did go rowing and punting, and ladies would dangle their hands over the side, and there were rings and bracelets and all sorts of things, and he was finding them, coins. Yeah, so that was very exciting.
Why weren't you allowed to go to the riverbed?
Because I might have got muddy and dirty and died.
Do you remember your first job?
Yes, let me think. I had to get a job after my dad was killed. I was 14. My mother was persuaded to let me stay on at school till I was 15 and do shorthand typing. And then I had to get a job. And in those days it was very easy to get a job. Everybody was in the war. Lots of people had died. And there was a job in the local paper for a shorthand typist up Richmond Hill. And so out I went up there, and they took me on. I was very ignorant, knew nothing.
Did you enjoy that job?
Well, I thought it was... I was a bit scared, I suppose. In those days, I think we were very less sophisticated than you are now. And I was very shy and quiet. But I was quite lucky in a way, because they were solicitors, and that was very... You couldn't ever make a mistake and rub it out, because it was a legal document. But the girl downstairs, upstairs were the solicitors, downstairs were estate agents. She was going into the land army. Wendy, she was a bit older than me, and she said, well, when I go you can have my job in the estate agents. And that was great fun and a growing up process, because the chap who was called the negotiator, who was supposed to be the professional person, he was off a lot during the day lecturing on accountancy, and I was left all alone, age 15, not knowing anything. So you grew up quite quickly, really. I learnt to write receipts for the money. Didn't really know what it was for, because he hadn't taught me anything. Kept it in a drawer. But that was all right, so I think it was quite good for me, really. I grew up quite quickly, yeah.
So did this make you move away from the river more, or did you...
No, I've lived here ever since 1938, yeah, ever since, yeah.
And so we've heard that your family worked on the river.
Oh yes, 400 years my family have been watermen. And sadly, because of the European Union, watermen have now disappeared. They were apprenticed for 7 years to a waterman, and they were, at the end of that time, knew everything about handling boats. My family were watermen and lightermen. Lighters were barges and the boats that went behind them. And that is a skill. I don't know if you've ever seen them with those huge barges with one huge oar at the back, manoeuvring a barge along the river. Oh, That's a real skill. Anyway, that's what they did. But now under the EU law, there's something called a boatman's licence, and you're apprenticed for about 3 years and you're supposed to know everything. Very different. I regret it very much.
So, watermen, was that only men?
Oh yes, yeah. But oddly enough, whether it was because so many men had been killed in the war, you could be apprenticed to your mother if it was in the family.
Mm.
And I read one book where there were 13 Hammertons, watermen, down on the riverfront. There were a great many of us. Yeah.
Would you have enjoyed becoming a waterman, or was it?
I wanted to scull, to row. My dad was a sculler, and that was his idea. That's what I was going to do. And I can remember being down by the riverfront because he had one of the boat arches which were bombed in the war, and he used to let boats out at the weekend, and seeing this old lady, she must have been all of 25, and he said that was Miss Gantry and she was the world champion sculler, and that's what I was going to do. But unfortunately he was killed the year he was going to buy some boats for me to train in, so that didn't happen.
So why didn't you take after your family members?
Well, because I didn't have my dad as my sort of mentor, you see. My great-uncle Walter had Hammerton's ferry down there in the boathouse, but although he introduced me to a young man, I was only 15, who had a sailing dinghy, and I think he thought that was going to settle me and I was going to settle down and get married. I was absolutely terrified. 15 is not like 15 is now. And no, it didn't happen. So I ended up in offices all my life.
So when you were originally thinking of maybe doing sculling or rowing,
Yeah.
After your dad died, were you still planning on doing that, or?
No, I knew that there was no hope of that. It was just getting a job, you know. But before that, when I was 11, my dad had got me a dinghy, a Dutch pram dinghy, and I used to spend all my holidays and weekends on the river, very often with my friend Angela, who lived in these flats that were bombed there at the foot of Water Lane. And we used to just row about on the river and have fun. Yeah, and I can remember once up at, I think is there a Thames Adventure place over at Ham?
Thames Young Mariners.
Yeah, and I can remember these boys were there fishing, and one of them's brother was Paddy Finucane, who you've not heard of, who was a very famous fighter pilot, and he was killed in the war, and we were talking about Paddy Finucane. Yeah.
So how have things changed around the area and in the river?
Oh, so much. That bombing changed the character of the riverfront entirely, in that I suppose also the advent of the motor car and people having more money and going away to the seaside at the weekend. Because what happened on the river, it was a wonderful, busy place all the time. Not only were there strings of barges taking coal and wood up to Kingston, to the power station, which you had to manoeuvre your way around, you know, and keep to the sides out of the way. Strings of them, you could have 15 barges in a row. But also, people used to go out at the weekends on the river, and there were camping punts. Have you ever seen those? Did you not see that 3 men in a boat thing on the television fairly recently?
3 what?
3 Men in a Boat. Haven't you read that book? Oh, you must read that book, it's very funny.
Did you read it when you were younger?
Yes, I love it. I still read it now, sometimes it makes me giggle. And camping punts, you put the canvas tent down the side and pegged it in and slept there the night and took your Primus stove and cooked your breakfast in the morning. Yeah.
Did a lot of your friends enjoy going out on the river with you, or was it just you?
No, actually no. By the time I joined youth club, they were not into the river. It was only me, really, that was the watery person. Yeah.
And have things changed, apart from changing, have anything stayed the same?
The river stays the same, it'll always be there.
Yeah.
I wish people were more aware of it. I am a bit against the way they've tarted it up down the riverside. We do not want hanging baskets, I think that's right. I like it to be a working river, you know. The wonderful thing is we've still got opposite boat building on the island. Now, when I was young, that used to be Mears steamers, and he had a whole fleet of steamers, one of which was the Marchioness I told you about, and people used to go out on them at the weekend. So not only would you have streams of barges, but you'd have, say, 5 or 6 steamers going up and down, and you to keep it to the sides out of the way. Yeah, so it was so busy. People were really enjoying it. And boys your age, you'd be down there saying to my dad, "Can I help you?" You know, mopping the boats out and things. Yeah.
What did the steamers do on the river?
Well, they'd take people up to, say, Hampton Court, or even beyond. You could even go through the locks to Windsor.
Was it a form of transport for people then?
No, it was pleasure, yeah.
Could you tell us anything about watermen?
Oh, yes. A hard life, and lots of them drowned. It was hard work. You worked late and long. And I can remember when my dad started, he used to have a ferry boat before he got the Arch and had boats there. He was working at Tough Brothers on motor torpedo boats and things, which was called work of national importance. So that's why he didn't go in the army. And he'd start at the weekends up at, do you know Wharf Lane at the end of here? The end of where the swimming bath was. There's a waterman's place, and there'd be 4 or 5 ferrymen ferrying people across to Ham Fields at weekends, and queues of people queuing up to go. And my dad would do it, and I can remember looking at his hands and saying, "Oh, Dad, you've got blisters." And he'd say, "That's all right, they thicken up." Because you rode across, you know, all the time. No chug-chugs. Yeah, it was wonderful. And do you know where the old Twickenham ferry is, down by the White Swan? Well, people queued up there to go across. I mean, that's what you did. It was fun. People used the river.
What do you think it would be like if we still had watermen now?
Oh, we've got boatmen. Not quite the same. It all changes.
So I suppose you think that people used the river a lot more back in those days?
Absolutely, yeah. No one had cars. I can remember, this is not to do with the river, in the war, standing up at Twickenham Junction with my mother and my friend and her mother, and saying, "Listen, there's a car." And we watched it come, watched it go. It's not like that now. No, because you didn't. A, it was the war, and you only had petrol if it was for national importance. And B, I mean, people didn't have cars. Yeah. Different world.
Was it very expensive to run a car?
Well, more expensive than men would have. I mean, when I first went to work, I earned £3, 10 shillings a week, and that was jolly good money. Yeah. But it went a lot farther than it does now.
Did watermen earn a lot in those days? Or?
No, they never did. In fact, where the Mary Wallace Theatre is, you know that, was often, it was a mission hall, and they'd have a soup kitchen for the out-of-work watermen in the winter if there was no work on the river. I know that my grandfather used to work on the barges in the winter, although he was on letting out rowing boats and things in the summer. But, you know, there was not work for them, yeah.
How did you earn a living in the winter months when the watermen...
With great difficulty. I know my dad came back to the river in the war, but he'd had to work for what was then the Joint Electricity Authority and various other things, because there was not much work. Yeah.
Oh, do you have any like cool memories or things that you'd like to tell us?
You don't want to hear about the day my dad died, because that's all sad. That really is very real to me, but I won't tell you about all that. I've written that up in the book Where the Bombs Fell, for the local history society. That is quite interesting. Tells you where everything happened in the war. Oh, I haven't told you about the Boys and Girls Regatta, which was a wonderful thing. It was before I was down there, but I've got some pictures actually. You haven't heard of Charlie Shore?
No.
Well, that piece of land at the end of Water Lane, although it is a shore, it's also where Charlie Shore's boathouse was. And every year the boys and girls in all the local schools would row, and there were prizes, and Charlie Shaw was a champion sculler, and he had a boathouse here which was pulled down before the bombing, and he was instrumental in getting all the watermen together to run this. And there's a picture of my aunt with Charlie Shaw's daughter winning a prize. My Aunt Mary's in that. Yeah.
The Boys and Girls of Gas, did you take part, or were you too old?
No, it was before even my time.
Oh.
I think it probably ended before the war broke out. I don't think it was running when we lived down here, but it was a wonderful thing, and lots of local businesses gave money for it.
Okay, let's just stop there one